I'll start it off with a question, then we'll open it up to some debate. You know, would you conclude that Scotland is there, can be there? What would your take on Scotland? I mean, because you spend time looking at deals here.
Yeah.
How far or near is Scotland from a functioning entrepreneurial ecosystem?
I think a lot of, if you like, the elements are there. I think in terms of the community itself really sort of standing up and saying, okay, we're going to build something here, I would say it's a little bit behind, you know, Boulder or even behind Dublin. I don't have a strong sense of, if you like, who the leaders are here, you know, who the members of the community that are stepping up and saying, okay, we're going to build something, you know. So my sense is that it's a little ways behind certainly Boulder or Dublin, but a lot of the elements are here.
Nigel, having started your business in Edinburgh, what's your thought on?
I guess like one question for us, like I'll be honest, in terms of my own personal time contribution to the ecosystem, I made a decision pretty early on to say, you know, the biggest thing I could do for the ecosystem is to build an enormously successful business. Looking at like PayPal, or you mentioned Skype. I guess it's interesting when you look at those other ecosystems, like Boulder's not one where I would point at a single company. Is that correct? Like is it necessary to have that big success first, or do you see ecosystems coming with, you know, lots of sort of companies in an earlier stage developing?
You know, in terms of when I was putting together the presentation, I looked at a lot of people's kind of views and take on it, and there were some people who were saying, you know, it's all about having 2 or 3 mega successful companies, but to me that kind of, that turns it into a chicken and egg, or a real chicken and egg debate. How are you ever going to have those mega successful companies if you don't have the other elements of the ecosystem, you know? So I don't think you can sort of sit back and wait for those big successful companies to materialize. You have to make a decision as a community that we're going to, you know, that we're going to do this. I think you can look at other things. You could kind of construct a meetup index, you know, how many meetups and events that are driven by the community are there. Boulder is staggering. You know, it's 100,000 people, but you could go to a startup meetup, you know, probably 3 startup meetups of some description every night of the week. You know, it's definitely not one company. To some extent, people will tell you it is one man though, you know. A friend of mine describes Brad Feld as the Pope of Boulder, you know? and that's about right, you know. He looms that large, but it shows you how influential leadership can be. And
how important do you think those cool glasses are that he wears? Is that part of it?
It must be. They're in the picture.
They're recognizable. You know? Yeah. Sam, you must have some thoughts about this.
I think you're right in saying that Scotland does have most of the ingredients necessary, and it would take its own form as well if you were to pull those together. Like you said, you don't try and be Stanford, you be a good version of yourself. But I spent, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years here in the startup community, and there is a lot of energy here for people doing things on the ground. And there was definitely a while, I've been gone for a year or 2, so actually I'm not that familiar with what it's like now. I visit a lot, but that's different actually living here. But there was a while where things were really moving. And I think it needs more good, well-directed leadership in each of those ingredients, you know, working together with their own idea of what a successful Scotland looks like. Because there's the energy to follow that. But I do feel like everyone has that energy, but they're sort of waiting for someone to point to a direction.
Well, let's open it up to questions about this topic. Nobody. One in the back. Yep.
Yeah, I really like the definition of net zero. It's not a word I'd come across before, and I actually think it's quite strong in Edinburgh, certainly in the kind of low-level community. But I kind of struggle. I'm an entrepreneur, starting a business called Flock Edu, and I'm kind of struggling at the moment with my model, which is an open innovation model. And I'm going to public funders who are saying to me, you've got a private limited company, this is public funding, you know, therefore you're not eligible. And private investors who are saying kind of the opposite, which is you started off with an open innovation model. So you've got 30 people who actually own shares in the business who've all contributed. So I'm trying something, I guess, that is really quite different from the norm. But what I'm finding is there's a real pull between public and private. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I would say there's probably two things. Maybe your model is wrong. Maybe it's not getting any traction because it looks like it's not the right shape to take forward. If you look at whatever the core thing you're trying to do.
Not eligible. It's eligibility criteria.
Right. So maybe it's right, and maybe what you're bumping into is just not supportive of it. In which case, I'd look at just getting money elsewhere. I raised seed funding for a company here, and I did the rounds and had lots of meetings, but it never really went anywhere. And I ended up raising money from Dublin and Germany, just through introductions and introductions and introductions, and then we had foreign investors let us do our thing here. So that's what I would look at. Like if you're struggling on the ground here, look elsewhere.
So that doesn't really kind of. I mean, I don't know. I mean, from that, I'm kind of interpreting that you don't think this idea of community is working at a higher level. Then.
What do you mean?
Well, because you're saying if it's not working here, go elsewhere.
I mean, you can raise the money elsewhere and still do it here.
Yeah, but the community itself.
So let me interject and sort of, if you have to look at this at scale. So the idea that what you're asking about could effectively have interest here, the same way that it had interest in Germany, but you have to see it at scale. If you look at the reason why so many businesses are getting funded in Silicon Valley, it's partially because there's enough people out there that are looking for businesses of all types that two things will intersect. As I was listening to this NPR report about the boundaries of the human body and whether any more world records are going to be broken in the Olympics. And they said, actually, all the people in India have yet to be tapped. The sports programs still need to develop there. Latin America as well. And so if you think about all the latent opportunities that are here and the ecosystem maturing to the point where you can see opportunities like yours getting funding here, it's a function of how mature the ecosystem is here to support opportunities like yours that otherwise are getting supported in Germany or in Silicon Valley. So it's not that the metal isn't here, it's more that it might not be ready, it might not be the time for it here.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, you know, investors by their nature are kind of followers rather than leaders, you know, and where things often go horribly wrong is where investors start to think that they can build companies and sort of be the innovators or creators of companies. They follow and they while there's an enormous herd mentality amongst investors. I mean, lots of you probably read Clay Christensen's book. I think there was 146 disk drive companies funded by the venture industry. 125 of them went out of business. It was one of the greatest destructions of venture capital investment ever. So there is a huge herd mentality. But having said that, it takes time for the herd to get moving. So especially if you're the first example of a new and different model in an ecosystem, you are going to struggle. You know, but that's true anywhere. I can absolutely guarantee you, if you go to Silicon Valley, there's lots of startups that, you know, whinge like hell about, you know, why can't they get funded? You know, it's not just here, it's everywhere.
I think we had a question, the microphone's in the back, yeah.
Hi, so my question is for the panel, but through kind of Sam. And it's about the leadership thing. So I was here a few years ago as well. I had 2 companies in Scotland. And very much I was frustrated by the momentum. I wanted the momentum to get faster and bigger. And I think I can kind of see it now, why there's such a key difference. And there are great leaders out there. There's yourself, and there's Gavin as well in Scotland. But I think the difference is that I come from a tech background, and Gavin a tech background. There's a lot of tech and tech meetups, and all these guys meet, and they meet together all the time, and there's an emphasis on tech. But there's not so much on product, there's not so much on that leadership, like the business side of leadership and taking ownership, and those guys don't tend to meet as much casually at meetups, and there's no product-based events in Scotland. And maybe you could speak about the difference that you saw in London as opposed to Scotland, and an emphasis on the other areas that make a successful business, such as product ownership and just anything to do with business. That would be interesting, the whole panel.
Well,
Back to you, Sam.
right. I think it's kind of natural that in the first case there's a lot of the more engineering type meetups, because I think engineers like to hang out and talk geek stuff. And even in London, like we run Product Tank, and that is maybe there's one other product focused thing there, but there must be 10 times as many engineering meetups. So I think it's just a matter of scale. You know, it takes a while until there's a lot of the engineering meetups, and then people decide, actually, you know what, we do need a bit more focus on product. The leadership and running business thing, I don't think I'm best to answer that. Like, there's the big argument of whether you can train and coach people or whether that's natural, and I don't know the answer to that. But I would say there's a natural evolution, and so long as there's support, there is a certain amount of infrastructure required to be able to organize those meetups. And it's kind of here now, you know, we kind of do have a menu. It's like, well, you need a venue, you need some sponsors, there you go, do your thing. If there's demand, it'll get traction. So I'd just say, if people are interested in learning more about product, start a product one.
Specifically to that product management, productization mentality, I've been coming to Scotland for 12 years, looking at startups, and I ended up connecting with somebody you may know, who's in the back of the room, David Farker, around this issue, because it was clear that not just in Scotland, but broadly in Europe, at least vis-a-vis Silicon Valley in the US, there's a strong lack of product management capability and how to take technology and turn it into a sellable product. And I think it's a gap that exists not just here, but across Europe. And I know David's doing a lot of work specifically to address this issue. So you might want to connect with him afterwards, but he's got a lot of thoughts on that and spent a lot of time developing that.
So I was just going to make a quick comment to answer your question, and I was going to use the model that Brian here put up. And actually, I think another layer to answer your question that could be added to this model would be one called supply side and one demand side. And kind of what you're saying is specific to supply side, saying, I'm going to create companies. So I'm defining supply side as entrepreneurs getting together, tech entrepreneurs or biz people getting together and creating value in the ecosystem so that at some point something comes out, right? It's like the Skype came out, and then boom, all of a sudden there's an exit, and then that money comes back, and then there's an investor. That creates supply of startups. On the other side, there's demand for startups, and this is where the government helps, this is where multinationals help, and this is where, let's say there was no startup ecosystem, but there's all these great initiatives around acquisitions and tax incentives for multinationals to buy local companies. All these things can put a lot of pressure for local people to be like, actually, or like SEIS is another example of demand ones. It creates demand for that kind of stuff. So with the SEIS incentives, which I guess somebody will talk about now if you haven't heard the term before, the SEIS incentives are creating a demand for startups. It's creating a demand for MBAs or business people to have meetups to say, how can we come up with something? So these factors, I would split into those two buckets, supply side and demand side. And in the supply side, I think that the question you're asking will naturally occur as governments and multinationals start creating initiatives that force people to come together.
There was a question here, sir, in the blue tie. Yep.
There are big players around in Scotland who are very interested in startups. The universities are very interested in startups, what they can do to underpin their legitimacy, if you like. The government is very interested because, you know, where are the jobs going to come from, except from smaller companies. The question is this: what does the panel think we can do to improve the atmosphere? What can the big players do? What can the universities do? What can the government do to improve the ecosystem and basically generate business birth rate, which is you know, sort of holy grail of public policy?
So this is a debate that I've been involved in a lot in the Irish market, and I think that Irish universities, frankly, do a pretty poor job of facilitating startups. You know, that they're too focused on IP protection and not focused enough on IP exploitation, if you like. So you get kind of tech transfer offices in the universities, and all they want to do is to make sure that the university doesn't get ripped off by those evil bastards in the in the kind of the financial community, you know. Whereas actually the thinking, to me, needs to be flipped completely. The IP has no value whatsoever unless you're actually exploiting it. So I think what universities need to do in terms of being real contributors to the community is first to focus the creation of human capital around the kind of the needs of the ecosystem. So that, you know, that's about making sure that you have programs in your universities that are, you know, generating the kind of talent that the ecosystem needs. Second, that they take an extremely liberal approach to the exploitation of IP. You know, tech transfer offices, they need to be the minimum barrier possible to an academic or a group of students taking something that they've done within the university and flipping it into the business. So my emphasis would really be on kind of squashing down the bureaucracy and just making that process as easy as possible. And the third element of that, to me, is trying to find commercial people to kind of to run tech transfer. The last thing you want in the world is an academic running tech transfer. You know, their head is just in completely the wrong place. Ideas are 10 a penny, right? If your great idea for a startup has not been thought of by 10 other people around the world, then it's almost certainly a bad idea, right? And it's all about execution and getting you know, getting commercial people who understand business execution to support the transition of IP from universities into the commercial world.
I mean, I'd like to add just a little bit to that. I think Brian covered the structural things that universities can do. I think there are some, in the freshman year of university, there's a lot of things that universities include as part of the curriculum that are just, you must know this before you continue. And I think, how many of you have heard of a lean startup machine? A few of you, all right. I mean, I think that there would be a fundamental change in the way that people think of startups is if it was a required experience. First, you know, within the first semester, just everyone has to do lean startup machine. The amount of interest that it would generate and how to deal with problems and how to tackle problems would be so much more student driven that some of the things that Brian mentioned would get sorted out by university, but the students themselves would sort out the other half just by already going through the experience at least once.
That's actually a great point. I mean, the other role of universities is to legitimize entrepreneurship as a career choice. You know, I'm quite involved with Trinity College in Dublin on stuff like this. I want them talking to engineering and computer science, and you know, actually, I shouldn't even say that. All students, talking to them sort of from day one about, you know, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur, and bringing people in to talk to them with experience and really legitimize the idea of doing a startup as a career choice.
Okay, I know there's more questions. We're going to shift gears to stay on time here, but hopefully some of those questions can come back at some of the subsequent panels. We're going to, I'm glad you mentioned the SEIS scheme. I presume most of you are at least aware of it or have heard of it, but we've got somebody that's going to explain it in detail so we all understand exactly what the implications are. Neil Norman from Shane and Tate is going to walk us through the SEIS, which I guess is applicable to this tax year only, or part of it is applicable to this tax year only.